Okay, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We'll let people get logged in. So if you want to go ahead and if you're watching this live, you can feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field. If not, if you're watching this as a rebroadcast, you can skip ahead maybe 8 to 10 minutes after we get everyone logged in from around the world. And we'll go ahead and let people get logged in. And if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them as well. I'm just going to check, make sure audio is okay. And I will go ahead and just play a little bit of my audio selection, my songs. I know last Hangout, my volume on my was a little weak. All right, so we'll see if that audio comes through okay. All right, so seeing people getting logged in. I saw that 15 minutes before we even started to hang out, we already had a thumbs down for an event that didn't happen yet, so it's kind of interesting. And you may hear my laptop that I monitor the hangout with in the background. Okay. All right. So it sounds like it's coming through okay. Okay. So I know there's a lot of people that are kind of staying home with the current situation. So that includes my son. So my son may make an appearance if he gets a little bored. So I'll apologize in advance. I also have a home being constructed right next to me outside of my window. So you may hear hammers periodically. But if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself if you haven't done that. And if you have questions, we're going to let people get logged in. And again, if you're watching this after the fact, after the live broadcast, you don't have to introduce yourself. But if you just want to tell us who you are and where you're from, that'd be great. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm broadcasting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States in Alexandria, Virginia. So and this is kind of an interactive Q&A session. So since we've kind of been in our stay home environment for a while, we're trying to do 2 of these hangouts a week where you kind of answer questions on your Steinberg software and hardware solutions. Okay, so I'll go ahead and we'll watch people get logged in and we'll get started in a couple minutes. So let's see who I see. We have some familiar faces. That's great to see on the hangout here. Okay, so I see some questions on the mix console snapshots. Okay, we'll go through that. All right, so we have Robbie from Dallas. We have Norway. We have Dave from southern UK, Sweden, Norway. All right, we have Austria, Manchester. Okay, so seeing question on chord track. Okay, so we have Taylor from Pine Grove. We have Atlanta. Okay, we have Millard from Pennsylvania. He's been on a lot of the hangouts recently. I see a question asking if me and my family are safe. We're all doing well. We're just staying in. So that's our strategy. Okay, so we have Belgium, El Salvador, Quebec, Sweden, Minnesota. All right, so we have Hollywood, Norway. Okay, so we have Minnesota again. We have from Avon. All right, lots of people. It's great. So we have some more people logging in. And we're going to try to get through as many questions as completely and succinctly as possible. Okay. Okay, so we have Iran. All right. Austin, Texas, Netherlands, Lebanon. Nathaniel Daly in Lake Ridge, Virginia. I have a house in Lake Ridge, Virginia, so I'm very familiar with it. I lived there for 20-some years. All right, so we have Finland, and for Nathaniel, and I grew up in Dale City, so just right around the corner, next town over from Lake Ridge. Okay, so let's see, question on automation panel. Tanzania, I hope I said that correctly. Norway, Tianta, Georgia. Okay, Atlanta, London, Norway, Slovenia, France, Buenos Aires, Sherman Oaks, Alberta. Okay, so more people are logging in. And if you haven't subscribed to the Cubase YouTube channel, this is a good time to do it. That way you get notified of future events. Okay, so we have Ecuador, Magdalen Islands in Quebec. Okay, we have Edmonton, Estonia, Atlantic City. All right, some more people are still logging in. Okay, we have Austria, Kazan, Chicago, Scotland, UK. Okay, more people are still logging in. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, so we have Baghdad, Netherlands. Okay, Quarantine in Sweden. Clibia. I'm not familiar with where that's at. I'll have to look it up. Okay, I have a question. What mic am I using? I'm just using an AKG D5. It's kind of like their $99 SM58 version, I guess. Someone at a store sold it to me new for $35. So, but I've been happy with the mic. So, okay. Where's the link to the very first Cubase Google Hangout, and is there a playlist with all the sessions in order? I think if you go to the Google Hangouts, there's a playlist on the Cubase channel, and there were some that were done on Club Cubase, youtube.com/clubcubase several years ago. And a lot of them will have indexes, so we try to get the index up within about 24 hours of the Hangout. Okay, so we'll go ahead and maybe one more minute. We have some more people logging in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so we have South Africa, Nottingham, Montreal, Berlin, I think all right, so we have Baltimore. Oh, Grant Nicholas from Baltimore. Good to see you on a Hangout. Glad you made this one. Okay, so, all right, so wait just another minute and get started. So if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the comments field, and we'll try to. We had some people that had sent questions in advance, and you could do that by sending them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Especially if it's a little more involved, I could do some setup for that. So we'll go ahead and get started. So it says, hi, Greg, I'm using Cubase 10 Pro, and I have a problem using the mix console snapshots. More specifically, after switching between them a couple of times, they just stopped working. This is a bit of a disappointment for me because it was one of the main features I was looking forward to using. Did you guys fix it in version 10.5? Is there anything else I could do in this version? So let's take a look at it, and I'll just open up kind of a smaller project here, and we'll get this going. So if you're not familiar with the mixed console snapshots, you can do quite a bit, and it's often kind of makes sense to do it, as kind of before you get into a lot of automation. I see some people, even I just saw on a Facebook post that people are complaining that the mixed console snapshots didn't include automation, and my feeling is that it's a snapshot, and like a picture doesn't make a movie. So if you have moving contents, but we'll show you what a mixer snapshot allows you to do. So if we have our mix set up, and I'll just have some different parameters here. So, and I will just hide my input channels quickly. Okay, so if I have a mix set up, and I wanted to take a snapshot of the different settings, I could come here and click in the upper left-hand corner. We'll see this Save Mix Console snapshot. I think we could have 8 or 10 snapshots. So if I have this set up, I would say as we're doing our drums, and if I wanted to set different volume levels, I'll do my Make Everything Louder version. And let's say I'll take a snapshot of that, and let me just bring all these down a bit. So I'll activate my quick link. So now I have 3 different mix console snapshots, and you could label these. But let's say if I just come here and I could recall the mix console snapshot. And let's recall this snapshot. And I'll just kind of go back and forth between these different mix console snapshots. And you said a few times when you do it, it just stops working. So I'll just keep kind of going back and forth, and I think we've done maybe about 10 or 12 times here now. And jump here. So that all seems to be kind of functioning as expected. So I'm not sure if it's like if you're running into it in one particular project, or if it is a number of different projects that you see it on. So, but if you wanted to, see if it's doing it on every single project, if not, you may want to, you can send me a link to clubcubase at steinberg.de if you have a particular file that you see that's doing it repeatedly on. I haven't really heard of that being an issue. You could always try to rebuild your preferences by holding down Alt Control Shift or Option Command Shift right after starting Cubase, and see if that makes a difference for you. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. I just downloaded VST Connect Pro on Cubase 10.5 Pro, and it does not show under the VST cloud. Thanks for your help. So if you have the VST Pro, that's a paid version. So a lot of people will see the VST Connect SE, and that will allow you to do 2 tracks free, but the VST Connect Pro is a paid update for that. So it didn't indicate if, it just said you downloaded it. So it may not show up if you haven't purchased that and haven't activated the license for VST Connect Pro. So, but, by default, you'll have the VST Connect SE and the VST Connect Pro you get, and that will allow you to do up to 16 tracks, MIDI, and to work within the same network. So make sure that you've actually purchased the license for the VST Connect Pro. Otherwise, it may not show up. Okay. Hi, Greg. I'm on Cubase Pro 10.5. Can you explain the buses, how we should use to create a nice signal flow, stereo bus, mix out bus, output bus, and then which should we place different inserts? There's different schools of thought on this, definitely. So, I know a lot of people will do different sub mixes, and take a look at kind of a larger project. And it could depend how many tracks and different elements that you have going on in your project. So I'll take this project I got from my friend Clay Ostwald, who's just a wonderful musician, writer, engineer, producer, everything good with music. And we could see, and he kind of has a lot of his stuff organized in kind of very logical way. So what he has, I think if we come over here, we can see all of his, he'll have a groove agent group, a drum group. It looks like he has, different snares like toms all grouped together, percussion, basses, keyboards, guitars, and vocals, kind of all as groups. And this is a pretty typical thing where, you could take all of your background vocals and put it into a group, and within a group you could choose to do EQ, or if you wanted to do like a compression on the group, you could do that as well. That's probably the most typical, and then send that group out to the master bus. So that's very typical. I know some people, like some film composers, will send everything to a kind of a pre-group and keep their master effects not really, and keep the master channel clean. And this way you could, from an audio track, if we added an audio track, we could choose to have, so if I wanted to add a stereo audio track here, you could choose the input from, different groups if you wanted to. So some people will do that just so they could print, just do a real-time pass-through and capture the audio of all their groups, or make stems from, quite easier. But there's no real, absolute wrong answer or right answer. People will do different approaches for that, and some people are just very traditional, some people will get very exotic and try to set up different busing architectures for parallel processing. You could do that if needed, but it really depends on the project itself. But probably the most traditional way is taking a number of different tracks here, and then I just want to grab the drum bus, or the, my guitars, my low end vocals, and have that as a group. And you could do processing on individual tracks or on the group tracks. And some people that may want to do internal print backs, that's where you could have another, like all of these groups routed to another group. So everything could be just simply printed back directly into the system. So once again, there's no totally right or wrong answer, just different approaches, and whatever gets you to the finish line. Okay, so a question. I hope you're doing well. Could you give some tips on how to get strings and cellos to sound more realistic in Halion 6? So let's go ahead and open up a quick project here. I think I have just maybe a cello part or a bass part in one project. So let me just think, if we come here. So we have just like a little bit of a string bass, maybe cello line doubled. So when you get into like working with your different string instruments, one of the things that could make a big difference is, working with the available articulations that you have. So let me see what library this is going out to. Quickly, give me a second. Okay, so I think we're just going to have this going, and it can really depend upon the library as well as to what articulations are available. So if we could see here different articulations, and if I wanted to just go on my, when I select the actual event here, we could just go to your expression maps in the editor. And then we could just say, let's import the key switches. So a lot of instruments. So if you're using Hallion, it does a great job of this. And now what you're able to do, excuse me, there's a little trickle in my throat, is to choose, I want these to be legato. And then, maybe I wanted this note to be, we'll do something a bit absurd, switch it to tremolo. And then I want to go back to legato before that note. So I could switch kind of the articulations that are available within the instrument. So if we listen to it again. So, paying attention to this, knowing that, different, I was in college, I was a pretty good bassist. So but understanding how like the up bows and down bows could work and the separations that you want to make sure that, like a phrase like this, you may want it to be a little more legato. And then before the downbeat, you may want that to be, slightly separated as well, kind of rhythmically in the editing. And one thing that a lot of people miss, and I know the question was on strings, but especially on winds and brass, is, actually take breaths and breathe as you play the part, and figure that, the trumpet player has to take a breath at some point. And if you kind of, just go and breathe like you're playing the instrument and think of that perspective and think about how much you're going to run out of the bow and you need to pick the bow up and envision that could really help in the realism of your string parts. So hope that helps. But check out some of the different articulations that are available if you're using Hallion, because it can automatically generate those articulations for you. Okay, question. When I automate the volume of a track, I'm not sure how to then increase or decrease the overall volume of the track other than using the gain control on the EQ channel. So if you have a lot of automation on a track, there's a question I got just the other night from someone I was doing some consulting for, where they had a lot of automation and they were thinking that they would have to set up like a VCA if they had, let's say, their automation like this in the track. So let me just, I'll hide just my. So let's say if I had my automation on my vocal track like this and I wanted to bring it all up or down, there's a couple ways to approach it. One is you could just select the automation and then just go to the center line and bring up or down graphically. If you wanted to compress or expand those differences in the automation to make it a little more extreme, you could do that. Another way to increase or decrease the existing automation is to select the values like I did and just go to your value here in the info line once that automation track is selected, and you could bring it up or down using your mouse scroll wheel. So those are a couple different ways. So you don't have to go to the EQ of the channel strip to adjust your gain structure of your automation. So you could just do that. And I think those are methods that work pretty well. Okay. All right. So going through different questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay. Okay. So it says, hi, Greg. I'm struggling with MIDI channels. When a chord track is active, the chord seems to be controlling, even if MIDI tracks are not set to follow chords. Any advice would be great. So let me just open up a chord track project. I think I have one maybe in my recent. If not, I'll just open it up manually. Okay, we just. My son is noodling on a piano outside, so sorry if it's annoying to hear in the background. Okay, so let's say if I have, let me just find a particular preset here, just like a Rhodes thing very quickly. So let's just say I want to audition with electric piano. Okay, so let's say as I have chords in, so if I wanted to kind of start off a project with my chord track, I will just kind of, start and we'll just enter in some chords. And say I just don't know what chord to put there for now. Okay, so I just kind of have some chords thrown in here. Okay, so, I'm just going to... Okay, so the question is MIDI. Okay, so struggling with MIDI channels when a chord track is active. The chord track seems to be controlling even if MIDI tracks are not set to follow chords. So one of the things that you could have set up is for any track that is following the chords. You may have this set up. So within a chord track, you probably have. There's a good chance that you have the use monitored track. So any track that is record enabled or monitored will be passed. And if you just have this set to maybe a specific MIDI track here, that's, I often have just like a Rhodes patch just for auditioning chords or a piano patch. But by default, it'll be set to use monitored track. So any track that you then come over here and just start to that is record enabled. So let's say if I have another track, let's see if I get my mouse to cooperate here. Sorry. I could just select that, and now I'll hear like the bass. And so I think probably what you're running into is maybe that the chord track, so if I say use monitor tracks here, so I hear the bass as well as the Rhodes because, they're monitored. So, but if I just kind of turn on this particular track, now I hear both, and now I take this off. And you could kind of solve that by just within the chord track, routing it to a particular track if you haven't done that instead of use monitored tracks. And I think that will kind of fix the problem for you. Okay, going through different questions. Okay, it says, hello, I'm a Cubase 10.5 user. Many updates after Cubase 7. I'm struggling with connections and studio setup every time. Problems. Greetings, Rudy from Belgium. So, most of the times Cubase will do a good job of making sure that your, audio connections are the same as where they were previously. And you could go to your studio setup and make sure that you have your VST audio system and have this, your audio interface that you're using defined here. So studio setup, and make sure that your audio interface is defined here. And make sure that you have, when we go to here, that we have the dedicated ASIO driver if you have one, instead of like a generic low latency MIDI or a built-in audio on Mac. So make sure that that is set for your audio interface. And then the settings will generally, for me, the audio connections are always preserved. So, and if not, you could just simply store it as a preset. So if you go, this is what I want as my input and output. And one thing that a lot of people will do is, if you're starting off, you could, once you have everything set up, choose to save it as a template. And then when you go to a new project, you can go under more. And here you could see all of your templates that you've created. And then your templates should be preserved. Now, I see some people that will start Cubase, and after Cubase starts, then turn on their audio interface. And that's not a great idea, because that's when you could run into where you have to tell Cubase to go to your interface and then set the connections. So make sure that your audio interface is on and powered up before you actually, start Cubase, and that could save you some configuration issues like you're describing. So give that a shot, Rudy, and let us know how that works out. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. How can I use the MIDI logical editor to find the lowest and highest note in a selection? So let's come here. I'll just drag some of these chords down. This will be... Okay, and I'll just join these together. Glue these quickly. Okay, I haven't done this in a while with the logical editor, but let's take a look, see if I can remember how to do this. And it's good, like, if you want to find the lowest note in a chord or the highest note in a chord. So let's say if we want to, select, and we'll say our type is equal to notes, and I think if we go to context variable, okay, and we can say equal to highest pitch. And let's see what happens if I just set this up. So that's the highest pitch, but let's say I think there's also, and maybe it's under value 1. Let's see if we could, okay, let me just, as part of the chord. And then, okay, hang on just one second. My son is calling. Okay, I'm going to get a movie started for my son. I apologize. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. And I'm trying to remember if we say type maybe is set to fixed value, and there is a way where you could say position within a chord. But I'll figure out the exact logical editor preset for that. But I know it can be done. I think I've done it on some previous Hangouts as well, and maybe even within the logical editor video. But I'll go ahead and see if we can do that. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on. Sorry about that, Taylor. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. Hi, I've put my external hardware compressor on my mix and returned it via the inputs, but when I print it on a track, it sounds a bit thin. Make sure one thing that you should be cognizant of or be aware of when working with external is one of the things you want it to do is to make sure, that you have it done in the audio connections as an external effects. And so if you wanted to have a compressor, we could just say, okay, I want it to come here. We'll add an external effect and we'll just call it like a DBX compressor or whatever. And we want to define the inputs and outputs. So we'll say it's a mono channel compressor. So we want to choose our ins and outs here where the compressor is connected. And then when we go to an audio track, go to my inserts, and then you'll see external plugins. And one of the things that you have to be aware of is by the time the signal goes in and out, that it could be out of time. So you want to make sure that you ping the system here. And that will measure the latency. So it could be maybe a phase problem if it's going out of your audio interface and then back in and being monitored. That could cause it to sounding weak. Another thing, it could be a gain structure going out of your audio interface to what the compressor, if you're going kind of like a -10 and the compressor is looking for a +4 signal. So you can, if you have it hooked up as an external effect, you could add an additional 12 dB of gain here to drive the compressor a little bit. But generally, it probably sounds more like a line level or an impedance mismatch when you get that, but also make sure that it's not out of time or that it's out of phase with your with the track. Okay. So we'll go ahead and okay, so see, hey everyone, I have a podcast I'm starting up and I need to make sure that the music I've made on Cubase, I won't get no copyright or anything of the sort, have used loops. So if you've used the content that comes with Cubase, you don't have to worry about any copyright restrictions. That's all fair use. So there's any of the included content you could use in your own productions, and it doesn't happen with a lot of programs. So there's not going to be any copyright issues with content that you use from the Steinberg content. Okay, question regarding automation. Can you identify a few reasons why one would use the automation panel? So the automation panel you could access by hitting F6 on your computer keyboard. And as we do this, we could open up. So one of the ones that we saw just a couple of minutes ago that's handy is the ability to come here and, I see this as a criticism a lot of Cubase, where people are like, I can't see the waveform as I draw the automation in. There's no reference between a waveform. So if you go to settings, you could come over here and say, I wanted to show data on tracks. And here, as I'm drawing in the automation, we could see the waveform within the automation lane. Another thing that's very handy is this reveal parameters on write. So let's say if I was automating this particular channel and I have that parameter set, and I'll just open up the full channel view here. So I will go ahead and just automate some parameters. So let me just put this into just a little bit of a loop. And I will. So say I have my drum track here. So any parameter that I automate, so my EQ, my level, my panning, when we have reveal. So if I come here and I start writing this automation, so if I adjust my panning, volume, another EQ point, all of the automation lanes can automatically open as you start to write the automation data on them. You could also switch to using virgin territory. So if you wanted automation that was just written in at particular destinations, and it's also really handy. I'll just switch to a different project here so this can make a little more sense as we listen to it. Like a lot of times you may want to adjust the EQ, but, not automate it. So let's say if I'm trying to dial in the bass sound and I have my automation on, so say I have this in automation, have it in write mode, and I'm just searching for the EQ. And let's say if I wanted to go to, my channel strip and I'm just searching for the right compression sound. And let's say you play it back and you realize that while you're searching for the sound, that it's recorded every single move that we did in the automation. So we'll just kind of jump. So if I don't want to automate my EQs and inserts and effects necessarily, that's where the automation panel can also come in handy, because we could suspend writing on, let's say, everything but volume. So now, even though I could do automation tweaks here on volume, I could make the tweaks on volume, on like EQ and effects and panning without those different parameters writing. Or if you wanted to bypass the reading of, different, so you could suspend reading of different parameters there. So those are a couple of things that the automation panel can come in really handy for. Okay, moving on to other questions here. Okay, thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so question from Millard. Greg, I seem to be getting extra files in the target folder when I do an audio mix down export. File names like Keep Your Distance Final 2204 13T03 underscore 25 underscore 57, etc. .wave. What are they? Are they useful? So usually, when you see those files, that could be indicative that there's a naming scheme in the So I'm not sure if it's more, it could be like if you've done bounces of files, but why you probably have such a long name could be set up with a naming scheme. So where you could set the name here. And what the naming scheme would allow you to do is you could include stuff like, the channel number, channel type, the name. So you could actually just kind of pick, I want the project name in there. I want today's date, so different settings and different separators. So that could give you kind of a name like that. So I think it's maybe if you're doing a batch export that you have new files that are maybe done with a different naming scheme. So I would look here, and it's a bit subtle. So if you look at the file name, you could click here, and then it'll kind of show you an example here. So every time if you did a batch export, that could give you new audio files with a naming scheme, kind of like you see. But if I misunderstood your question, or if it's not about naming, let me know. But if it is a new name, it could be creating a separate, distinct file with the new name and keeping your original file as is, which is why it could look to be extra. Okay. All right, so just seeing who can I get Iraqi Quantize from? Another Cubase 10.512. Okay, so I'm not sure if I understand that. Okay. Okay, is it possible to comping two different tracks simultaneously? All right, so let's give it a quick shot. I'll set up a new project here. And I'll do a quick all right, so I'll just record these quickly. And let me just put it in cycle. Sorry. Make every horrible mistake I warn people against. All right, so we'll do a couple passes here. Okay, so I think when we do this, and we have our comp tool. So here we have different takes. So we'll grab our comp tool, and this will be kind of for one track at a time, and I will just turn my snap off, and let me jump down to this track. But if you had different guitar parts that were recorded together, that may be a good time to take your lanes if they're tracked in lanes, but to turn those into our track version. So here we could say, let's create track versions from lanes, and I'll do it for this track as well. So now what you could do is, you could link these two. I haven't done this in a long time, but let me just close the lanes. But if you wanted to, switch between the different takes, you could have both of them selected and do different track versions. And if you wanted to split the track version, let's say here, and let me just activate my snap again. So probably if you want to do multiple tracks for kind of, creating a composite track, work with track versions, but you could do one at a time with kind of the comping tool. Okay, question. Is it possible to open .nki files for Contact in Halion 6? I believe that Halion will open it, but we don't open any of their encrypted files. So most of the sample libraries, third-party sample libraries, will have encryption on it. So we don't try to circumvent that out of respect, because we wouldn't want someone doing that to us. So while it can load an NKI file into Halion 6, if you bought a commercial license, it probably won't carry that over because that will be using some of the encryption options in Halion 6 or within Contact, I believe. Okay, reading through different comments and questions. Okay, it says, question, my Cubase Elements 9.5 freezes after a while when I use Groove Agent after listening to the drum patterns. What could cause that? You know, sometimes what you may want to do if you run into situations like that, and, you know, when you load up a kit into Groove Agent, realize that it could be a tremendous amount of information depending on the kit that's being loaded up. So let's say if I have, my Groove Agent here. And I'll just go to load up a quick preset and we will take a look at it. But there's a setting in Groove Agent where, you know, it could take more. You could kind of set the balance between the kits that are loaded up into memory versus what's loaded up into RAM. So this is something I would try if you have, you could set your preload time and your streaming cache kind of, so you may want to adjust the balance between how much is being loaded from RAM versus how much is being streamed from disk. And that could probably help out if you're running into problems, if it's kind of, starting to take away from memory. If you have like 8 gigabytes of RAM, that could be something that I would play around with. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi, I'd like a quick overview of applying effects in the mixer, please. Reverbs, delays, etc. on individual soundtracks in the mix. Sorry if that's a bit basic, but I'm new to Cubase. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'll just quickly import a vocal file here. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to have your effects. The two most common ways is, let's say if we're here, and I'll just do it in the project because we have a different meter. So let me just start that. So give me, it makes sense other than having it stretched. Okay, so let's activate this project. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and solo the vocal. And I will bypass everything that we have going on with this. So I'll open up the file here. So when we look at our channel settings and we could access this. Sorry, my mouse is not liking my desk today. Okay, we could have, two different ways of accessing effects. So we could have inserts and sends. And I see a lot of people, like if we have just our dry vocal. So if I wanted to have an effect that was only on this particular track, that was dedicated to it, and this is often where you'd use compression, EQ, dynamics. So I have just a little bit of two compressor. This is where I could use an insert, and an insert is dedicated to the particular track. So now when we do this, so if I wanted to just have that track dedicated to that. And if there's a lot of people, and I think this is kind of not necessarily a great workflow, that will come here and just put like a reverb on their insert as well. So we come here, let's say, okay, we want to have revelation, and I want to look for like a plate preset. I will just kind of come here and I will search for plate. So as we do this, and what you have to do generally is take the mix parameter now. If I wanted the piano to have the same reverb, I would have to have another reverb plugin as an insert for the piano. So what I always recommend to people is to take your reverbs and use those on your sends. So now I could have the reverb on that's going out to my vocal, and that same reverb that will be going directly out to my piano as well. So they sound like they're in the same room. So, that's, so you can think of inserts as being dedicated to particular tracks, and sends, instead of running, I see so many projects where people send me where they have 24 of the same reverbs as inserts, and they wonder why their CPU usage is slow. And what the send level allows you to do is to blend how much of that particular sound, instead of using it within the plugin. When we come here, we can say, let's listen to, and you can blend in the balance between the dry signal and the affected signal. So that's just kind of a quick basic overview. So think of the inserts as being dedicated. The sends can be shared. And while we see 8 sends, each track can have 8 sends, and you're not limited to 8 physical effect sends. You could have more if necessary. So those are just a really good, basic info on using inserts and sends and effects. Okay, so we have a question. Why is it impossible to control plus wheel to zoom when the range selection tool? It's only possible when a tool is not on top of an event in an empty space. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. So here, I'm just kind of zooming, and if I have my range tool, and I have kind of the combo mode, so I'm just holding down control and using my zoom wheel when it's in the, so whether we're in the object selection mode or in the zoom mode, and let me just try if I turn it off, my combination mode, but that seems to work for me. I'm just making sure I'm reading it right. Why is it impossible to control plus wheel? And this is command or on Mac, control on PC with the range selection. So let's see if we have a range actually selected, if that makes a difference. No. It is only possible when a tool is not on top of an event in an empty space. So it seems to be functioning wherever I place it, on top of the event, an empty space, in the object selection mode and combined mode, or when I go to the range tool. So the functionality seems to be pretty consistent. So, but if you have, if that's not working for you, let me know. Okay. Okay, just reading through different questions, and my Hangout just jumped like 8 hours ahead in my timeline. Okay, just scrolling through. Bear with me. I'm sorry. Okay, so a question from John. Hi, Greg. Could you please show a few tips on video and audio editing and export a few seconds of a small edited clip? Does it re-import to the project even though you reached the 2 video track limit? Okay. So let's take a look at working with video and being able to export video. And just open up a different project for this. Okay, a couple of tips and tricks when working with video that a lot of people kind of miss. So let's say if I have my video window here, I could hit F8 and that will open up my video screen. So let's say okay, so a couple things that some people miss is the fact that, you have, if you go to the transport, you could activate this thing called use video files edit mode. And as soon as I just come here, I can move the event. I'll just enlarge part. I'll take my snap off. And now if I wanted to place a specific MIDI event at a specific point in the video, like let's say right where the guitar comes in, you could just simply, adjust that and move the parts to automatically adjust based on what the video position was. So now let's say if I wanted to export just a section, this is one of the cool things that's in 10.5, where maybe you had additional video that was like pre-roll or post-roll and you need to just deliver the video between the particular selections. And one thing that's also very handy, a lot of people miss, is let's say if I have like this part of the video, I could double click between like 2 locators and with my range selection tool. And what I could do now is I could just choose to delete time, and that will edit the video and the audio simultaneously. So if I come here where we have this scene, and we'll just play. So if I wanted to redo that, we can just cut that particular scene out. So that's a very handy thing. It's not really intended to be a video editor, but if someone called and says, we cut this particular scene out, you can just, get rid of that. Now, if we set our left and right locators, what we're able to do is go to your file menu and we'll choose to export video. And when we do this, we don't really have the option of, having it automatically placed into the project again. So it's not going to, you could take if you did an export audio, that would automatically take, you have the options of having the audio files go in. But at this point, we just say, we'll call it April 14th test export. And now export just the part of the video between the left and right locators. And I think I saved it to my desktop, but I will just confirm one more time. So at that point, we don't have the ability to import it directly back into the project. But if I wanted to go directly to my Finder, go to our new Finder window to our desktop, we could just see our April 14th test export, and we could just play it back. So that's the soundtrack. So you're not prompted to automatically put it back in, but you could do a new project and import that. So you don't really run into the problem of a limitation on video tracks. Okay, we have a question, Greg. Is there a way to rotate the video in a video track? I assume by rotating the video that you want to have this automatically, flip 90 degrees. So there isn't a way to do that. I'm not sure what the use case is. I know sometimes if you have a monitor that can switch orientation at the monitor will do that. But I'm not sure what the use case is. But that could be, I'm sure, pretty easily done in like a dedicated video window. But if there's a use case, if you could just let me know in the comments. Okay, question. Will it be possible to demonstrate frequency splitting and routing? I've just crossed over from FL Studio, where regularly used patcher, to frequency split. How's this done in Cubase? So a lot of people will just kind of do this using like a multi-band compressor. So let me jump back to this project here really quick. And I'll revert it. All right, so let's just go to maybe my master out. And we'll go to like our multi-band compressor. And here you could just solo independent ranges. And you can do this on individual tracks. So you could just solo that particular band if you want to. So you could put that on groups or put it on a master bus or put it on individual tracks, and you could split frequencies pretty easily. Okay. All right, going on. Thanks for all the great questions, everyone. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg, Cole from Jamaica, using the stay-at-home pack Cubase elements. I have a motif or a MoX F6 using as my audio and MIDI interface. Please show the best way to connect to record audio and MIDI into Cubase. So once you have that set up, you could, go to your, if you're not, and one thing for everyone, if you're not familiar with this Stay Home Elements collection, you could really check it out by going, it's a 60-day license for Cubase Elements, Wavelab Elements, the Absolute 4 VST collection, and Dorico Elements. So, while a bunch of people are staying home, it's a great option to be working with. But if you wanted to get it set up with your MoX F6, I believe that it has audio and MIDI as part of the USB driver. You'd probably just go to your studio setup, and at that point, you can say, I wanted to, under the VST audio system, you'll probably select a Yamaha. It might be like a Yamaha Steinberg USB driver or Yamaha USB driver, something like that. that would allow the program to pass audio from your keyboard and MIDI from your keyboard directly into Cubase. And once we have a MIDI track, so if you add a MIDI track or virtual instrument track, and you want to make sure that you have the channel set accordingly. And for MIDI tracks, it'll probably be captured in all MIDI inputs by default. But if you want the sound to go out to to the MO-XFF or the MO-XF6, you can just simply set the MIDI output port there. For the audio, what you want to do is go to your audio connections and make sure that you'll probably see like a stereo in and stereo out by default. So let's say we have, it'll probably look something like this. And you want to, again, choose the device and use the inputs from your MO-XF and take the outputs from your MO-XF here and be able to, and set those to your Yamaha. And that way you could record audio and MIDI from your MO-XF6 directly into Cubase. Okay. Okay, question. When using cycle recording, is there a way to minimize the file size of each wave when you decide which take you want to keep? So if we've done a number of cycle recordings, so let me just come directly here and I'll add an audio track. And I'll do a quick cycle record. Okay, so we're doing just a number of different cycle recordings. So, they'll all show up in one particular take, and then you could open up the lanes, and each recording that you've done will show up in a lane. So you could, and if you don't see the lane option here, one of the things that you could do is just kind of right click, and if you go to track control settings, it could be a parameter that's hidden. So you may see like a lane display type. So if all of a sudden you do this and, it's like, oh, I don't see my lane function, right click and go to your track control settings and then go to your lane display type and make sure that that is in the visible parameters option. So at that point, you could just open and close all of your multiple passes. And if have done some of the comping functionality like we looked at earlier, you can say this is, I'll just take my snap off by hitting J. This is my main function and I only want to see those particular parameters. You can now just have everything show up on one lane, which of course you can minimize and maximize in view. So if that's not what you're looking for, Ralph, just let me know. Okay, so I see that the music level is better from Robin. He sent me a nice note letting me know. So when I listened to the last Hangout, I realized the music volume was a little less, and my son kind of ran in 10 minutes before the Hangout and, adjusted all the parameters on my USB mixer. So I'm glad it's better. All right, so I'm just seeing a comment that the sound quit. I'm just going to go and make sure that we're still hearing stuff. All right, so it looks like sound is still going on. Okay, so reading through more questions. And again, if you have questions in advance, feel free to send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So we have some that were sent in that we'll kind of migrate over to. Okay, so it says, hi, I'm using Cubase 10.5.12 Pro. I have a question about the future of Quantize from another computer, about our Iraqi music and a different Quantize. Let me see if the question continues. bear with me a second. I'll scroll down. Okay, so it says, I have a question about the future of Quantize from another computer, about our Iraqi music and different Quantize. So let me just see if it's continued a little bit. So maybe if you could, and the name is not written in English, but if you, maybe you could tell me what you want to do in the Quantize. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, thanks for all the videos over the years. Is there a possibility to have something similar to this for Nuendo users? We'll happily take, Cubase, Wavelab, Halion, Groove Agent questions. So if you have, Nuendo questions, just let us know. Okay, so it says, hi Greg, my shortcut for show hide right zone is not working in key command. Shortcut is saved. Any ideas? So usually if you come over here, it's Command Option R for the right zone to turn that on and off. If that key command isn't working, sometimes key commands can get assigned to multiple different functions, and sometimes a function could cancel out. But if you actually just kind of go to your edit to key commands, and then just kind of type the key command. So it should be Command Option, or which would probably be Alt Control R. Type that in, and that will tell you what function that the key that key command is actually done. But if you go to Window Zones, you'll see Show Hide Right Zone is where the function is. So I'll just reread this, make sure I'm understanding it. So my shortcut, show hide right zone, is not working in key command. Shortcut is saved. Any ideas? So make sure that sometimes I've seen people assign the same keyboard shortcut to, 3 or 4, or, I saw one producer did like 7 functions for the same key command, and some of the key commands were canceling out their intended function. So make sure that it's not assigned to anything else as well. Okay. Okay, question on ghost notes in MIDI. Are we ever going to get them, or is there a workaround for this? So I'm not sure, there's a couple different things that ghost notes could mean. So, if you could specify what exactly ghost notes, I'll show you a couple things. So if we have a MIDI track here, some people will call ghost notes when we have like a drum editor, and let's say I have, and I'll just expand this out. Let me just make this longer here. All right, so let's say if we have in our drum editor, and I have different notes that are spread all throughout, that, we could come over here and just say, show all drum sounds with events. So some people call that ghosting. I could see, for like drum parts where that can make sense. But a lot of times if you have key editors, I see some people wanting to only show the events that are shown. But if you played a wrong note, and then let's say, you're in a key of B flat and you played an E natural, do you want it to not show, and you didn't play any other E flats, do you want it to only show the notes that were out of key? So some people consider ghosting notes like that. Another terminology that people use is when we do like a copy. So let's say if I wanted to come here, we could do shared copies. So I could say I hit Control K, and then I could just click on shared copies. Some people will call this a ghost event. So when I change one of the events here, that all of the other events will be kind of shared. Some people call that a ghost copy. So those are a couple of things you could do, but if you could maybe specify exactly what your ghost notes mean. Some people consider ghost notes notes that are lower velocity, like on snare drums and stuff like that. So, okay. Hi, Greg. MIDI, is there a smart key to copy single lines from a concert piano track to a single line, tracks of violin, viola, cello, etc.? So if you have a piano part, there's a number of different ways of doing that type of thing. So let me jump back to my project that had a piano part. I remember, we did an interview with like a composers roundtable at Hans Zimmer's studio, and what this kind of came up in discussion where, I think Ben Wallfish, who's, a wonderful composer, who worked with Hans on a number of stuff, but did, Shazam and Serenity. I saw that on a flight not too long ago when I was still able to fly. But I'll just go ahead and add a couple of MIDI tracks here. Okay, and what they really liked was, the ability to, and they had commented on, I wanted to take, a number of parts and, orchestrate. So they like to compose from piano and orchestrate that. So let's say you had like, a string quartet or a string section here or whatever. So they could just simply select all of these events, and I'll give these kind of unique colors just to make it a little more obvious as we go along. Okay, so let's say I'll take all these parts and then we go into score editor. So, what a lot of times what they would do is just kind of take, lines and say, okay, I want all these lines here, and, they would copy, and then once they have like, the multi-part editor here, they would just activate multiple parts, and there's key commands where you could just say, now I wanted to just go to, my violin part and paste, so if you wanted to do stuff like that where you could orchestrate pretty easily. If you go into the score editor, there's some other functions that you could do. Let me just select just the one. So kind of doing like a paste or paste at origin could be handy, but in the score editor, I think there's an explode function, which a lot of people can do. So you can say, okay, I wanted to explode this to new tracks, and we'll say number of new tracks, and we'll say 4, and we could have, split notes. And as soon as we do this, we could, have, additional MIDI tracks automatically created based on the, exploding. But a lot of people will take, we'll kind of compose everything on piano and then orchestrate from there. So being able to, double click and, on a piano part, and within the editor to paste at origin is a really handy way of doing that, and it's a common compositional technique. And a lot of them feel that kind of doing it from like piano voicings kind of lends itself better to natural orchestration as well. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. I wish there were an option to have some optional buttons in which you could assign shortcuts or macros, just like those on the CC121, for example. I've tried to get that as a feature for a while, but one of the things you could also get, the name of the company is eluding me now, but they make like just a little programmable array of buttons, and I think I have one with 32 buttons on it that you could have fire off different keyboard shortcuts, and you could build different groups. So there is some like really it's the Stream Deck. A lot of people use it for running OBS, but I've started going through making like a really extensive Cubase setup for it, so every single functioning Cubase is kind of accessible on a Stream Deck. So if you're looking for like a piece of hardware that does that, but I've tried to get a software version of that for a while, but I'll reiterate it now that it was mentioned on a Hangout. Okay, we have a question. Can I use 24-bit audio and 16-bit audio together, or do I need to convert first? How do I do that in Cubase? Cubase can, by default, play back, multiple audio file resolutions. So you could have a 32-bit integer, a 64-bit floating point, a 16-bit, a 20-bit, a 24-bit audio resolutions, all resident within the same project. So that's doing it by default, but one thing is it will have to have a common sample rate. So you could have multiple audio file bit depths within the same project, but a common sample rate. And as you import files, you will be prompted if the file is a different sample rate. You will get prompted to, I think it's one of the preferences even, where once you're under preferences, and it might be under let's just maybe under audio or editing. Let me just. So on import options dialog box, you could have it automatically open the options, or you could have it automatically convert to the project setting. So that way the sample rate can get converted. But multiple audio file bit depths within the same project, no problem at all. Okay, we'll move on. Question is, hey Greg, what's the easiest way to do automation in Cubase? I think the easiest way is to, go to the fader here and click on W to write the automation, and just start moving the fader. And you could see that since we had that parameter reveal function, that as soon as I, just come here, that will just automate the parameter, and you could. So I think that's probably the easiest and most straightforward way. Some people also do kind of a pre-fader kind of clip gain. So if you wanted to just come here and just grab your blue line, you could do that on the events, and that will affect it. Or if you wanted to grab the range selection tool, and if you just come here to split, let's say I split that range, and then once you go to the top center, you could adjust kind of, the volume clips as well. So if I wanted to, adjust my clip gain volume, you could do that. So, but just, for straight automation, just click on W and move the faders up and down. I think that's the easiest way. Okay. Okay, so says, can you show how to split keyboard using input transformer, and how to assign sustain and modulation only to a part? The sustain and modulation will, if you only wanted sustain and modulation on one particular part, First, let's take a look at the input transformer. And what the input transformer will allow you to do is to adjust, to filter different MIDI data coming in. And we see this little squiggly line here. So if we wanted to set up a split point, we could say, we wanted to, on this, I only wanted to play below C3. So we could say, and we could have different conditions. And one thing that's easy to forget with the input transformer is the need to actually turn it on. So if I want it only, I could say we want to transform, but we could say filter notes, and we could say that the note value 1, which is the pitch, is going to be, we'll say less than, and I'll just say C3. So now it will automatically, filter out every note that's not that is less than C3. Now, if we wanted to, and how to assign sustain and modulation only to a part. So, the sustain and modulation will just be recorded as MIDI data. So it's not necessarily assigned only to a particular part. So it's going to be just recorded. And if you have multiple parts selected, but if you set this, the input transformer could be local, meaning for the particular track, or global for the, which is, for all tracks. So if you wanted to, for this, say I want to, I didn't want it to, I wanted to filter out like another condition, activate it, and I'll say, filter, and we'll say, type event equal to a MIDI controller, and I want that controller to be value 1 of the controller, which is the controller number. I want it to be equal to, controller 1 modulation. So on those two things, you could filter out modulation. And, if you want to do sustain, only for that particular part. So if you want to set it globally, you could do that. But so, those are some different areas to do as well. Another way of doing filtering that people often miss is just going into preferences. And if you wanted to go to your MIDI section, and you could filter out different controllers or different, if you wanted to filter out sys-X or pitch bend, different controllers there. Okay, so question. Hey, everybody, question. I recently worked on a project in 6/8 and one in 12/8. Is there a way to group 3/8s together in the key editor? So I think this is actually in 6/8, if I'm not mistaken. So if we have I'll revert this. Okay, and I'll just add a quick instrument track. So I'm going to add a signature track. And we see that my time signature that we have from the project is 6/8. Now, if I double click here, you have a click pattern. So I could have the click pattern. So let's listen to it. I'll turn on my metronome. And I could edit that metronome pattern when I double click on it. So if I wanted it to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to emphasize like that, I could just change the click pattern. Now, why I've done that is now you could actually right click here and you could say use the metronome click pattern for grid line emphasis. So when I double click on a part, you could actually see kind of the grid lines. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we could see kind of the grid lines here based upon our metronome click pattern. So that could really kind of help for doing different editing. But you can see kind of the emphasis here for, on the 6/8. So 1, 2, 3, clock pulse 4. But if you want to do like a 2 plus 4 plus 8, again, if you changed your metronome pattern, so if you're going to like 2, so now when I double click, and I'll just blow this up so it's a little easier to see, we'll see 2 beats with a grid line emphasis on 3. So it could change based on what you have selected. So you see a question, is there a way to indicate the tempo with a dotted eighth value? Currently not, but I've recently kind of brought that to discussion of some of the developers. So I think, I know it's being discussed as we talk, but it's a pretty typical thing that Cubase doesn't do. Okay. Okay, I'm just reading through some more questions. We'll get to some of the questions that were sent in. Okay, regarding MIDI articulations, is it possible to have 2 notes, for example, a C1 and a C2 that plays in the same time, but C1 articulated in long, fast, and C2 on tremolo? I don't think that when we do that, let me just try. I'll just add a. And it's going to be kind of more of a limitation of like the actual sequencing engine or the sample engine playback. So let's take a look. So I think, when most samplers are going to switch the articulations and the samples, that it's going to automatically carry that over globally for all the different elements. But I'll try something just out of curiosity here. So I'll go ahead and import the key switches for. Okay. So if we have. Let's say our 2 notes. I think these are going to share the same articulation, but you could have different controllers, but I don't know a way to have that. So I think it would probably need to be on 2 separate tracks, but you could have 2 separate parts and route it to 2 different MIDI channels that could have different articulations. But I don't know of a way to have it automatically play 2 notes of the same articulation, just because I guess it could be done depending on how the sample is set up. I don't know any sample libraries that are set up to actually do that. And just seeing a comment just about probably like taking the breaths earlier. It says, I agree. Same as playing drums. I think how a drummer would play, more realistic. Sounds weird. I close my eyes for a few seconds, imagining how instruments, say a trumpet, is played. Works for me. Yeah, one of my friends, Rob Arbiter, has worked with Stevie Wonder for a number of years and just a brilliant composer, programmer, synthesist, sound designer. He's probably one of the best drummers I've ever heard, but he does everything with 4 fingers. And, when he's doing MIDI drums, because he knows that drummers have 4 limbs to work with, and he limits all of his playing to 4 fingers, and he could come up with like the best, the funkiest MIDI drum programming that he just plays in real time with his left hand. And it's amazing to watch him, but that's one of his things. He limits to 4 fingers just so it's realistic as well. Okay, says, please, can you show us how to use Cubase to add an arpeggiator? So there's a number of arpeggiator plugins. So let's say if I wanted to come here, let me just get a new patch up here real quick. All right, we get one that's not monophonic here really quick. Okay, so if we wanted to do this, a lot of the plugins will have built-in arpeggiators. So if I wanted like to go directly within, within a plugin like our, Retrolog here, so we could just say, okay, I want to do different dance arpeggiators. I'll just turn this up a little bit, make sure everyone can hear it okay. And there's a number of different, so you would just kind of finger a chord. Another method to do if your instrument doesn't have an arpeggiator is to, when we do this, is we'll just turn off the arpeggiator here, is one of the plugins that you'll have as a MIDI plugin. So we go to your MIDI inserts and you could choose like Apache 5. There's Apache SX and Apache 5. So if we do Apache 5, this is a pretty basic arpeggiator, so I could play if I want to change the length to eighth notes, or let's say I want it to be eighth notes for the step size, or eighth note triplets. And if you have the arpeggiator here, so if you just kind of play more interesting chords as well. And one of the cool things is that you see this little record button. So as I would record, just play a chord down, and we could look at my fingers I'm pressing here on a keyboard. It'll now actually, instead of just like I held down a block chord, but what it actually did was record the arpeggiation into a track in real time as well. So those are some of the tips that you could use for working with arpeggiators in Cubase. Again, a lot of instruments will have them. But yeah, check out the Apache. And if you wanted to take your own phrases and use that as the basis of the arpeggiator, you could use the Apache SX for that. And if you go to the Greg Ondo Q&A videos, we just did a video recently on the different arpeggiators. It kind of walks through it in a bit more detail. Okay, question. Why would the maximum real-time audio processing load peak even when nothing is playing? Many plugins, and we could see this, when we go to your VST performance under your studio menu. So people often, when we're working with, you see the performance characteristic, and I'll hide this. So when working, you may go, okay, nothing is happening, but it's still taking a lot of CPU resources. One of the advantages that you have, and I think you may be able to see it in in the preferences. Let me just check. But with VST3 plugins, they don't actually take any processing power until they actually are doing audio. So a lot of times you may have tracks that are coming in and going out all the different times. So you could say there's a preference here for suspend VST3 plugin processing when no audio signals are received. So when no activity is going on, a VST3 plugin doesn't take CPU cycles. If there's activity going on, that's when it works. So sometimes people will be using different instruments in a verse and a chorus or an intro or ending of a song. So, but they may not all be going at once. So with a VST3 plugin, you could, if it's not passing or processing audio, it's not taking additional CPU resources. So that's why if you're using a lot of older VST2 plugins, that they could be taking up a lot of resources when sitting idle doing nothing. So if you have the option of running the VST3 version, that's a huge reason why you'd want to use that version as opposed to the VST2. Okay. All right, just reading through questions. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. If you've learned any tips or tricks, feel free to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to the video. All right. Okay, so it says, hi from Taiwan. It's probably very early or very late there. So hope everyone is well and healthy. Is it possible to arrange edit window tracks order with mixer window tracks ordered differently? The two, I think, will be synchronized. So if you could, so let me just take a quick look at something, and I'll shut my phone off very quickly. Sorry about that. But the two are kind of synchronized. But what some people will do is in the mix console, the order will be the same, but if you go to your visibility options, at this point you could hide channels from the mix console. And I know there's a lot of people that want to be able to just drag within the mix console and rearrange, but that currently doesn't work that way. But if you have like your mix console here, and we had a number of audio tracks, let's just add some random audio tracks that if you select a track, you could move it here and see that reflect on the mixer. But these are kind of tied together. But I know it's a long-standing feature request to just drag and drop from within the mixer. But if you have this view open, which a lot of people do, and you move it in the track window, you could just see that automatically carry over. Okay. Are there any ways to create vocoder style effects on a vocal within only Cubase? I've used the vocal correction and event editor to do extreme things to vocals, but any extra methods? I know some people will do pitch correction. So let me just see if I could. So I'll revert this quickly. All right, so I will just come over here and let's put on as an insert and go under pitch shift. I think we go to the pitch correct plugin. All right, and I think if I add a MIDI track, that we could set the vocal input from the pitch correct plugin. So this might be able to, let's just. So listen to our vocal, and now I'll just play some MIDI notes. And let's adjust our speed here. And let's say external MIDI note. So maybe adjust the tolerance and speed up. So you can kind of play the melody, and if you wanted to do some more, like shifting stuff, you could, set that up as well. It's not exactly a vocoder, but I know there's a number of freeware vocoders that people run, but currently Cubase doesn't come with a vocoder per se, so that's something that you could play around with some of the pitch shifting. Okay. Okay, so I see, please can you show us how to use Cubase to add an arpeggiator to a hardware synth that doesn't have one itself? Example, if my D50 set to local off, can I play it with a controller keyboard and add arpeggiator? So just, going through and what we showed a little bit earlier, going into like the MIDI inserts and using like the built-in arpeggiator, Apache 5, or the more elaborate Apache SX, you could do that with, and that will send MIDI data out to any MIDI device that you want. Okay. So I see a question. Hey, Greg, is there any reason why the 7th and 9th chords don't work on a chord editor in my Cubase? The 7th and 9ths don't work. I haven't run into that. Let's give it a try, but I seem to have done lots of 7th and 9th chords. So say I wanted to see 9. And let's say C7. So it seems like this is all. Just drop some more chords in here randomly. So all those different chords seem to be working fine. So, I don't think that would be a limitation if you had something like Elements, but let me know if you have the Cubase Pro, but I haven't seen any problem with that. Okay, it says, hi, I watched your tutorial on how to set up parallel compression in Cubase, but I can't find a direct routing output option. Racks menu in my version. Can you show us how to set it up in the artist version? So I think the Cubase artist doesn't have the direct routing. So if you have the artist version and you wanted to do parallel processing, you could kind of do it. We'll set it up for a quick project here. Okay, so people use like parallel processing for, vocals, or drums are very popular. So if I want to take all of these tracks, and I had the Cubase artist, so say I want to take all my drums, I think we could, I'm going to quickly just add 2 group tracks. Okay, I will go to my sends, and then I will select all of my drums. So I will just come right here, hold down the shift key. If I don't keep hitting the wrong key, sorry. So we'll select all my drums, and I'm going to activate quick link, and I will, on my sends, I want to send it all to group 1, all these to group 2, and then let's go ahead and set our varying degrees. So right now we have both of those tracks, all of my drum tracks, going to these 2 groups. And let's say this one I want to apply let's add a bit of EQ in as well. So there's my original source, and here's my parallel source. And now you can just blend those 2. So the unaffected source can, give you kind of the dynamics, and then you kind of get like more of the overall punch with the compressed group. And just find that sweet spot of balance. So, okay. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, is there any way of deleting all insert effects on a single track at once?" All right, I think there's a way of doing this. So let's go to a particular track. Okay, so I have all these inserts, I think. Let's say there's... I think there's some kind of keyboard shortcut for this to... Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so I think if you just click to the left of the inserts and hold down the Alt or Option key, you'll get this message, "Are you sure you want to reset this rack?" And we'll say reset, and all the inserts will be removed from that single track. So question, any way to slave Pro Tools 11.3 native to Cubase Pro 10? What a lot of people do is just simply go to your project synchronization setup and send MIDI timecode out of Cubase. So we say, let's come over here under your timecode source. You can say MIDI timecode, what MIDI port that you want it to be sent to. And at that point, you could have the other program just slave to incoming MIDI timecode on that port. So that's an easy way that many people just use to synchronize multiple programs. Okay, going through some more questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so I see a question: how to write a chord, and I just wanted to see if this is in the chord track. So if you add a chord track, and then we just grab like your pencil tool, you can now just double click, and then you could have the chord. Or if you want to say MIDI input, and you could just play a random chord. I sometimes like to just put my fingers randomly on different keys and see what chord it comes up with. So, traditional chords, as you just hit your MIDI controller, it'll just capture and you could write the chord in for you. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so I'm just saying, just quick comment from Millard. It's like, I agree. This is very cool, very customer oriented, doing the Hangouts. Many thanks to Steinberg, especially Greg, for all the effort and time. Thanks. I just want to make sure everyone is learning different things from their Cubase. So, and we'll try to have the index up of all of the questions maybe later tonight. Okay. Okay. All right. So, okay, question. Hi, what is the best way to make and export projects in 10.5 to achieve the highest, loudest gain without having distortion? I license tracks and they have said they need to be louder. Thanks. One of my friends who does a lot of licensed music and tons of libraries and reality shows, one of the things that he does is in his Cubase, he has it automatically go to Wavelab for different processes. So, if you have, once you do an export audio mix down, you have the option of doing a post process as well. So you can say after export, you could choose to open up in Wavelab 10, for instance, and do mastering there. So, and sometimes, if you're doing licensing stuff, make sure, you could also import your mix down track directly into the project. And one of the things that could help with that is once you have kind of your mix down file, is just to select the file. And if you go to your audio, to processes, you could choose to do a normalize. So after the file has been mixed down, you could choose to normalize. And within 10.5, one of the things you have is you could do it in values of dB. But a lot of times when you're delivering for like Spotify or for different streaming services or different post facilities or, broadcast material, you could actually do it in loudness units now. So like you could say, okay, I want this at minus 23 loudness units. That's often used for broadcast. I think Spotify change is at minus 14 LUFS or loudness units. So those are some of the different standards that you could do. So, once you have your mix, just try normalizing it to different loudness standards and you could do that quite easily to work with. So, okay, so I see a question going back to the chords. Does anyone know why the tension part on a chord editor doesn't work? It only lets me select basic triads. So we'll just kind of jump back to that. So if I wanted to see, let's say I want a D flat ninth, flat fifth, ninth with a G sharp in the bass. So that all seems to be okay. So we see a C, and you say a C seventh, sharp fifth, sharp 11th. So let me just, I think if I play the chord here, So, if you could think of a C, and just looking at your example. So you could say, like C seventh with a sharp fifth, or, augmented chord. So, it seems like it does a lot of different tensions. So play around with it a little more, but, it seems like it does most of the stuff that you're missing there. Okay, question. Hello, how to get a plugin bass management, but I found out that in Nuendo there is a bass management. How can I install this plugin in Cubase, or is it possible to buy this plugin separately? The bass management system will be for, within, if we have, that is a Nuendo thing, and it's going to be a Nuendo specific. It's not going to be available to purchase separately. But, also depending on, some of the different audio converters will have their own bass management system. I know the Yamaha Nuage, the converters, it's set up there. But, if you wanted to easily send, more, parameters, to like your LFE, if you're mixing 5-1 in Cubase, if we have a 5-1 bus and we have an audio track sent out to the 5-1 bus, and we'll choose our 5-1 as our configuration here. And we're send this to 5-1 out. And now when I go into my channel panner here, we could see this. And while it doesn't allow you to necessarily change, what frequency is doing it, often that's going to be handled on the speakers, but you could now send, more to the front, or, different amounts to LFE kind of, directly from within the surround panner. There's some stuff, but that, for the more extended bass management, that's going to be a Nuendo specific feature that's probably not going to be coming to Cubase. Okay, so hi Greg, what is the best, fastest way to divide a MIDI piano recording, a mid track or an instrument track, to two or more different tracks by note values? Okay, so let's jump back to our piano part here in this project. So let's say we have our piano part, and as we do this, we want, from this point on, I wanted every note, let's say below E2. So I will we'll select this event, go into our logical editor, so we can say we want to extract. Type is equal to notes. Value 1 is less than E2. And then here's our second MIDI track with all the notes that are lower than E2. So once again, just kind of select the part, go into the logical editor. For the function, choose extract, type is equal to note, pitch less than whatever pitch you want it to be, and that will automatically extract it and place it at a new track on the bottom of the project window. Okay, so we have a question. If I have several instrument tracks, each loaded with a contact player and one instrument only, would this have an effect on my CPU load? It could really depend on, and you can experiment with different programs and different instruments, how they deal with multi-threading and multi-core CPU usage. Some people find that having a separate instance of the instrument loaded up with multiple tracks, so where you have multiple instrument tracks, that splits across the CPU cores better. So if you have like, a 14 core or 29, 28 core system, whatever, something like that could utilize the cores. Whereas sometimes some plugins, when you use it and you load up multiple instances within one plugin, that would kind of only use one core of one CPU core. So it could really depend on the instrument. So I don't work with Contact that much, but you could experiment pretty easily just by creating, load up one project, one track, and duplicate it and enable and disable tracks, and that could show you kind of the CPU usage. But I think you get better CPU efficiency if you have a multi-core system by splitting into more instrument tracks. I could be mistaken, and maybe other people could chime in as well. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to pan a stereo track in such a way to hear only the right side centered mono? Okay, so one thing that a lot of people miss when we add a stereo track. And let's go to the mix console, or I'll just look at this here. Okay, so when we go to the panner, we could have a balance mode, and that's the default mode. But if you click just to the right, here we could have a stereo combined panner. So now we could say, I want just kind of the right channel, and you could kind of pick different components, how you want this. You could also kind of reverse the panning like that. So if you want it, more of the right channel in the center and the left channel panned hard. So if you hold the mouse down and move up and down, you could adjust the stereo width, but you could also just kind of reposition that within the stereo panning field as well. So again, you could switch the modes just by going to the combined, by a balance panner, which is default, but just kind of click there again and you get more panning options. So you could have the combined panner, and that gives you a lot more flexibility for stereo panning scenarios. Okay, so question, what's the fastest way to copy an automation pattern to different parameters and different plugins so multiple operators share the same pattern? So, and you see this a lot with like different instrument parts. So let's say, we had, I'll just switch to one of my drawing tools here. So let's say I just had a parabola in my automation here, and let's say I selected that range and I duplicated that, and I wanted to apply this to, my audio channel here. So I could now, just select that automation with like the range tool, copy, go to my automation here and paste, so you could select multiple automation tracks and just copy and paste the automation quite easily. Okay, so we had a question. So can you explain the new surround panner in 10.5? There are now 2 new blue dots. Do those represent the back channels? How do we know the balance between front and back speakers? Thanks. Okay, so I think I may still have my, let me just check. Okay, I think I had it in the other project, but I'll just make a 5-1 bus here quickly. Okay. And I'll route this to my 5.1 bus. My mouse is not cooperating with my desk today. Sorry. Okay, so once you're kind of, here, what you actually can see is this blue dot is kind of, the center. That's your kind of listening perspective. So we see if we move more to the back, we could just have your audio, if we want it to be more in the front, and, we could have it rotate around. So if we wanted to just spin, and you could have, kind of the different views. So depending on if you're doing more, if you're doing some ambisonic stuff, you could have some additional controls. But you could check kind of the distribution. That's how wide or narrow that will be, how much is going into the front or the rear speaker. So if you want it to be, narrower in the front but wider in the rear, if you wanted to adjust the front to rear balance, and overall, if you want it to be spread out wide or narrow, or the amount of depth, you could adjust, you could increase level as well. So if you come here, you could just have the different parameters, adjust the radius, you could, tilt. So if you wanted to just kind of rotate different parameters here, so that would kind of give you, if you again want your positioning and just being able to move, and you have different options here as well, where you could say, I want this to go more into the center speaker, so some different controls there. So I'm not sure exactly which dots so you think of this center position here as where you want it, is kind of like your source, and you can see kind of reactions there with those additional controls. Okay, just reading through different comments here. Okay, so I'm seeing just a comment, I think, on pitch bend. It says the scale on Cubase is over 8,191. Never understood why. Is 682 a semitone? This is so imprecise and boring. How do you do? So when you do pitch bend, the pitch bend is dependent upon the instrument. And within the MIDI specification, there's, 16,000, 382 values or whatever the number is. And that's just, how the MIDI specification is done. So, that's why you see values of, that don't seem so musically aligned. And I think, we've had some discussions on making that a little more obvious, but, it's really, a pitch bend of 682, if the instrument is set to 2 semitones or an octave for pitch bend, would yield, completely different results. So that's one of the things that you could, that you have to be aware of. It's kind of a MIDI specification thing as well, going back to 1982. Okay, so it says, we have a question. I love Cloner, but I wish it didn't modify or speed up the audio when bypassing. Any suggestions? So let's go ahead and give it a try. And Cloner is a plugin that could take a tremendous amount of processing. So let's just see if we'll switch songs here. Alright, so I'll put the Cloner plugin on the lead vocal, and this is like really good for like thickening up vocals by doing a lot of, chorusing, like think of it as a multi-chorusing. So let's take a look at what happens when we bypass it. So I think it'll be under modulation. And here, like getting back to our, how to do maybe some more robotic kind of stuff. So let's take a look. So we'll start with it on. And we'll just have it bypassed here.
We played our records into the night. I turned it up, you were mine.
And I will listen to it in context.
Up until now, that was okay. Guess all along I was so naive. Now you've had your losses really. Musical history laid out on the Lord. I've got to choose what's mine and what's yours. 'Cause now you're asking Beatles or songs. Something about that just sounds so wrong. What's too late to stop?
So I'm not really hearing any of the audio slowing down or modifying the speed. Something to check is, maybe make sure, I'll see if I turn on my delay compensation, the constrained delay compensation, to see if that makes a difference.
Please stop asking Beatles or songs. Just leave it alone. Oh, you still love when I play Hate You.
So I'm not really hearing any of the changes with or hearing the speed of the audio change when bypassing. If you do, just let me know in the comments. So a question, newcomer to Cubase. Hi, where do I find percussions in Groove Agent 5? So if you had the full version of Groove Agent 5, you can come over here, and there's a separate agent for that. So I'll go to drum, and this isn't in the Groove Agent SE, but in the full version that you could get as part of the Stay Home collection with Absolute 4. So if I wanted to just take this track, and one of the gems in Groove Agent is worth the whole price of admission is using the percussion agent. So I'll just right click here and I will say, let's load kit with patterns, and you'll have different options here. So I'll choose a different family. So we can see all of our different families here, and I'll just choose, we'll have one that's our percussion agent, and I'll just do Disco Craze. Sounds wildly inappropriate for this song. Okay, so now when I could say follow transport, and we'll.
I should have told you you were out of tune. Whatever you did, that was okay.
And I'll go ahead and just make this louder.
Up until now, that was okay. Suddenly it's Beatles or Stones.
So, that's where you could find it. So just, again, make sure that you right click on one of the agents and load kit with patterns. And at that point, make sure that you have the percussion agent. And that way, and you could go through and change all of the different instruments as well as the patterns that are going on. So you could have it all kind of completely random. And if you wanted to, see, different aspects where you could even edit the pattern, you could do all sorts of great stuff there. So that's how you could load up the percussion agent. Okay, so we have a question. Best way to quantize live drums? This track's a good example, so we'll activate this. Okay, so we'll just play some of our drums here, and I will go ahead and just, I have all my drums into a folder, so I'll just go ahead and solo the drums with the click track here. Kind of what every drummer hates when you do to them. So we hear the click, and you hear different drum fills, or it's not going to be as tight. Okay, so when I want to make that a little tighter, what I want to do is first we want to put it into a folder. And I'll take my kick drum tracks and let's go to hit points. I'll activate the hit points. And what we want to do is find kind of the rhythmically significant parts of the kick track to have the hit points on. So I'll do that for my kick and let's say my snare. And this part kind of starts off with a little bit. So I don't want like the hi-hat to be part of the snare. But the hi-hat is pretty significant in this particular track. So I will also do that for my hi-hat. Okay, so we've kind of figured out those hit points. So I placed them into a folder, and then we have this group editing function on the folder. So now once we do this, I select an event. They're all selected. I could move it, and they all move as kind of one super entity. We'll go to our Quantize preset. In the upper right-hand corner, we'll just see our Quantize value, and as we click here, we could give priority to different drums. So I can say I want my kick to have the highest priority, and I want my snare to have priority. And let's say we'll scroll down to our hi-hat. We want that to be a factor as well. So at this point, we have all these tracks grouped together, and what I want to do is to slice. And now it's created thousands of slices within our file. I'm going to say my grid, I want this quantized to 16th notes. Now we could choose to, use audio warping, which would stretch the audio, or just kind of slice. So I'm going to just quantize, and I'll click quantize. And as we do this, it has shifted all those events over. And as we do this, it could leave gaps where different elements. And why we group these together is because if we have a snare that's in the snare mic, it's probably going to be in the tom mic, the hi-hat mic, and the overhead mics as well. So if we move just a snare but don't affect the overhead mics, then you get into weird phasing problems. At this point, what we want to do to fix all the gaps is to just hit crossfade. So as we do this, we can now come over here, we'll listen to our drums. And with the click again. And as we have different drum fills. And like this snare fill that was coming up, it was a bit rushed. So that's an easy way to quantize live drums. Okay, so we'll move on. I know I had some questions that were emailed in advance, so let's go ahead and get through some of those before our hangout ends. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone's learned a tip or trick, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel or if you've learned something new today, just give a thumbs up so we know that you're liking the video. Okay, so I see a question. When I freeze a VST instrument, I'm losing the ability to use mute and solo. It's always playing. Is there a way to freeze but keep control over those two? So that's one of the issues that will come up when you do freeze tracks. It is a permanent thing and you'd lose some of the ability. So, what a lot of people will be getting into more is doing more render in place. So you could take, just a particular section of an audio file, and this gives you a lot more flexibility. One, in that, when you render in place, you still have the event. So let's say if I wanted to render in place this particular event, I could go to my project menu here, or my edit menu rather, and I'll just choose render in place, and there'll be different settings. So I could say I wanted this with no effects. I want it with the channel settings, which would be inserts, EQs, channel strip, with send effects as a complete signal path, or with the master effects. So, but once this is done, we could also just choose to keep the source events unchanged or mute the source events. So if I wanted to just render like that one selection, it'll now just take that, my oohs and ahs here. And you could just have, that particular file laid out for you right there. So I'll just delete these. And sometimes when you do it, depending on how many tracks that you have, how many outputs you have, you may just want to remove the unused tracks. But here what it's done is it's automatically muted that particular part and created the audio file. It's carried over the same color, place it into the same track. So as we work with this, if I needed to change the MIDI, I could mute the audio and still go back and change my MIDI, and it's still there. So a little more flexibility. We can think of, freezing as more of a 2001 workflow, and render in place is kind of more of a 2013, 2014 workflow. All right, I think my son is knocking on the door. Hang on just 1 second. His movie's probably over. Bear with me.
Now you're asking Beatles.
Okay, sorry about that. We have a new movie started, so we should have an hour and a half more time. So, all right, so let's move on. So we have a question. Can you explain a little bit more about the loop function in the sampler track? It's a little bit messy to me. I'd like basically to be able to select manually with the range selection tool with snap to zero engaged once cycle, and set the loop start point and end with continuous play until I release the key. When I engage the loop tool, I have this green overlay showing what I can't really set to start and end points where I'd like to precisely. Okay, so I'll find a quick loop that will drop into sampler control here. Okay, so let's say if I have a loop here, so we'll zoom in and out. Okay, so once we go to our loop mode here, so you could have kind of, different loop modes. So you may want to just put until release, and you could choose kind of like your loop start point. So we see this, and this could be a little confusing at first visually. So let's set our loop end point. So and what you're seeing is kind of, the beginning of that loop kind of carry over. So let's say I want this. So now if I have it on continuous, sorry, it's a really awful sounding example. Let me find something that's less hideous. Okay, so let's say I have this set up. So when I play it, we'll have, and I just wanted to set like one particular area for loops. So, all right, and I won't hit, sorry. So if I wanted to just loop like one particular start and end position here. So say if I just wanted to have this, so now when I play the note, we could have it be continuous. So or if you wanted to alternate, we should play back. Or you could just have it loop once. Or until you release. So hold down the note. So they'll kind of give you a sense of some of the looping options. I can see where it's a little weird to see the green overlay on that, but that allows you to figure out. So, and that's just kind of as you move the end point of the loop over, that what should do to, gives you kind of a visual idea. Okay. So question, today I was hoping you could help me with all this. Would be better if you could email on this instead of a Hangout if possible. So it says I use a 2018 iMac and I have two other monitors connected to it. One of these is another iMac and the other is an Apex. What is the best way to connect all these, and how are people connecting more than three? Not that I want to do that. My issue is that I have to use up one of the Thunderbolt ports for a monitor, and I need it for something else. I daisy chain an Apollo X8 to Apollo satellite in a Thunderbolt dock because that's how I connect the other monitor. But I feel that like there has got to be a better way to do this where I can free up one of my Thunderbolt 3 ports. Please help. Different Thunderbolt breakout interfaces. Like I have kind of an expensive Belkin that has 2 different display ports on it. So it really depends on, it's kind of, it gets to be problematic when, where you have to buy tons of different breakout expansion options. So depending on which breakout expansion option you have for your Thunderbolt, those will yield different options. Some of them you could do like 2 4K displays or, different types of connections. And it really, and I'm not that familiar with how many Thunderbolt ports there are on the 2018 iMac. I know you always want more than what you have, but it could be a limitation when people are running multiple monitors or generally running it off of like, a dedicated graphics card, and I think, a lot of people running, I have a friend in Nashville who runs, I think, 12 monitors. And he has just dedicated graphics cards that are just kind of stacked, and that allows you to run more and more monitors. So, okay, so we have a question. I built an orchestral template. Now I'd like to add my orchestra to some existing projects with drum, bass, guitars, etc. What's the easiest way to do that? So if you have kind of a template that's already set up, you could just come over here and just say, I wanted to import tracks from project. So let's come over here and say I have an orchestral thing, like a Schubert piece here, and I wanted to use that as my template. So I could select all of my orchestral instruments. All these are in a folder, and I could say, let's exclude the events and parts. So if you have a template, you could just have a, just do an import, save the template as an empty project and import that. So now we'll say import all the events and parts, hit OK. And now it's automatically taken all of my orchestral parts from a different project and loaded it in without any of the actual parts. So all of the mapping, the articulations, the key switches are all going to be there. So that's the fastest way, is just go to File, to Import Tracks from Project. Okay. Okay, so I think we covered one of the questions that was emailed already. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg, how can I open up plugins in one screen only? I have 3 screens. Let's say that's where the mixer is. Thanks. I'll play around with this. I just kind of got my I just got my studio set up. So I have kind of one monitor I've been using for work stuff, but I got my other 2 monitors that I just have set up. So I'm going to try to get them all connected to the same computer and see if I could figure out where to, how the different plugins are, opening up. So maybe by Friday I could have an answer for that. Okay, so I see a question. Is it possible to pan a dry signal hard right and the affected signal, reverb example, hard left? I would like the affected side to not have the direct signal, just the reverb effect. Anything I've tried me forces to have the signal plus effect on the right side. So if we wanted to, let's just jump to this particular vocal file here.
You're breaking my heart, you're breaking my heart. Yeah.
So here we're going to have our effect, and this is often used with like guitars, where you may have like 2 guitars that are panned, and in the 80s a great production trick was to take like an echo or reverb and pan it in the opposite channel. So if we go directly to our effect here, I could say, okay, I wanted my reverb, let's say the vocal, I'll just get this. Okay, so I want the dry signal panned hard right. So we'll have our vocal here. I'll bypass our send. So
We played our records into the night.
And now we want the reverb only in the left speaker. So I'm going to turn the reverb on, and then you'll see this little panning icon here. So let's just go. great. Let me just add this from, but usually you see kind of the panning, and this would allow you to do the reverb. And let me just add, and if maybe I had this reverb set in mono, let me just check. So now I could just take the reverb here and pan that. So as we listen to it, and let me just go back, turn this on.
I turn it up, you wouldn't mind. Up until now, that was okay.
So try playing around with the different panning here. I know some people will also, just have a mono reverb and be able to kind of pan that. Some people also come to the reverb. And, if you run it as a send, you could go into the routing and have it only on, one particular channel as well. So, but try panning your effect sends. And I think that should kind of take care of it for you. Okay, a question. The side panel on the track view, which has the VST sounds, doesn't have icons for all the sounds and loops I've bought from Steinberg. I notice you have an icon that says drum loops. I've purchased almost all the sounds and loops and that don't have their icon. It would be nice to drag a folder from the media bay to that panel to increase a shortcut type icon. I was in discussions today because I ran into the same thing on one of my computers, and I was kind of rebuilding my studio computer, my personal one, and all of mine kind of showed up under my media bay here. So I don't know, and I'm going to play around with it. I don't have him showing up on my Mac under loops, where you see kind of the pretty icons here for like Klanghouse and different options here. But I think, and I had done like a fresh scan of the media bay. And, so maybe if you, refresh the views and rescan the disk a couple times, try that and see if that shows up. But I know I sent it to one of the managers for our sounds and loops, and they were kind of having inconsistent results that are looking into that. Okay. Okay, so it says, I have a question about tempo track and the sample editor. Is it possible in some way to have the sample editor in sync with events on a track when you have tempo track with tempo changes active? As of now, it seems like the waveform in the sample editor gets more and more out of sync with the event and the corresponding track the further to the end you get with tempo track deactivated. It's perfectly in sync. So probably what you need to do is, like, as we have a new project here, and it could be just that those particular tracks aren't in musical mode. So if I have... So let's say I just drop this loop in. Okay, so, as we want to come here, let's say we have our loop starting right at this point, and I'll select the loop and kind of whatever. So right now, if I change the tempo of the loop, it's automatically going to play back kind of at... So, and that's because why it changes and becomes kind of like a tempo parasite, if you will, is because I have that placed into musical mode. If I don't have that in musical mode, it'll probably sound like this, and it'll still play back the original tempo without it following the different tempo changes. So make sure that you have it set to musical mode. And even if we do this and have, different tempo changes, this loop will now kind of will follow whatever tempo changes you have. So see if, so that should kind of keep it in sync with the tempo once you're in musical mode. So give that a try and see if that helps. Okay, so we had a question. I use a debut video capture software to make educational videos. I have a UR44 interface connected to my computer. I can capture both video and audio that comes through it from every source except Cubase 9.5. It captures video from Cubase with no problem, but it won't capture the audio from it like it does with other sources. All audio that comes through my computers is routed through the UR44, so I don't understand why the software won't capture the audio from Cubase. The only logical conclusion I can come up with is that Cubase is routed differently path through the UR44 than other sources. Is this something I need to do to route the audio from Cubase to the same path as those sources? So Cubase is communicating with UR44 through an ASIO driver, and we do that specifically to bypass the operating system to minimize the latency that many operating systems impose. So I know some people have set up different, how I use it to capture in is I always take, like for my Hangouts, I will take the output of my interface, like I used to use a UR44, but I have a UR24C, and I take that output into like into an analog mixer that has a USB out, and that's how I kind of transmit my audio out. So that's a really good solution if you have another interface just to capture that way, but it's running on a different data path for the audio because there's all sorts of different, problems that can be imposed that way. So make sure that when you do it, that it is going to be a different path. But I've seen some people like go through like really, I think voice meter is like a little utility to route audio in and out, and it may not work with ASIO. But ASIO is kind of a different path. But you may be able to find some other sources, some other utilities. But try I think it's voice meter or something like that. Maybe the company's Banana, something that does it. But look into that. Okay, so it says, I cannot render in place a MIDI track of an instrument, a Roland GR1 that I create in Cubase. The multi-temporal parts of my GR1 are grouped as MIDI tracks. I recorded music in one of those tracks. Others are inactivated and want to render it in place with music, but nothing seems to work. And I've seen this, and I just recently saw a big discussion on a Facebook group about this. If we have MIDI data, going to an external device, so if I have a MIDI track here, and let's say, all of my compositions, all of my MIDI notes here are being sent out to my MIDI output port, which is, let's say, connected to my, GR1. So when I come here, we can say this is going out of my UR24C. So I have a hardware MIDI port going out to my GR1. So unless, but there's no audio. So Cubase is just sending MIDI information out to somewhere. And the device, like the Roland GR1 or like a keyboard, like a DX7 or a D50, as was mentioned earlier, is going to generate those sounds. And you have to take the audio outputs of that into a mixer or listen to it with headphones. But Cubase, once it sends a MIDI out, it really doesn't know necessarily where it's going to or what sounds it's making. So, but you could, if you wanted to render it in place, you have to bring the audio back into Cubase. So when we go to your audio connections, you could take the outputs of the Roland GR1 and have those as an external instrument. So like here I have it set to like a montage, and you would just say, and you have to have an audio interface with like 2 inputs available. And you say, okay, my GR1 is connected, to my inputs on my UR24C, and we'll say on inputs 1 and input 2, let's say, if I had it set up for stereo. So then once we go to add, we would say, I want to add a track, and then we need to set this to under our external plugins to, and you would route it to your external instrument like your GR1. Then once that MIDI information is going out to the GR1 and the audio output of the GR1 is being fed back into Cubase, then you could do a render in place. But otherwise, we can't just render MIDI if we don't know what the destination is. So Cubase has to see it. And that's, the great convenience of working with virtual instruments is like you could just render it very quickly like that. So, you need to hook it up as an external instrument or just record the audio back in. But there's no way that Cubase knows, how to generate the sound from MIDI to an external instrument unless it's connected back in. Okay, so I see a question was emailed in that we covered the last time. All right, so I just see another point. So the question from last time is, I recently upgraded from Cubase 8.5 to Cubase 10. I've set up customized folders in Cubase 8.5's plugin manager, and I placed the VST and effects in them accordingly, but those folders are not showing in Cubase 10. Cubase 10 seems to have them automatically created its own folders for everything. How can I get my same exact plugin manager folder set up from Cubase 8.5 to show up the same way in Cubase 10? And again, I think it's with Cubase 9 or 9.5 came the new plugin manager. And if you just, we mentioned it before in the last Hangout, but for the benefit of others, if you, and it's completely different, so otherwise you could place things into folders and you could have folders set up. But the plugin manager now is you can make your own collection. So we could make an empty collection and you just have to, we'll give it a name, and you could drag your own plugins over. So you can say, okay, I want this. You can make, a new folder if you wanted to. So you can say, these are all my reverbs, and probably what you did was set up, so if I wanted to place that into a folder, what you did is probably organize the folder structure and Cubase carried that over. But this way you could kind of make your own, organize the folders, and there isn't a way to transfer what you had done previously into the new version. So it's kind of a new way of doing it. And I know if you have a zillion plugins that it could be a pain in the butt, but I think it's a lot more powerful once you do have it tweaked. Okay. We had a comment that was mailed in. I bought MIDI guitar, an app from Jam Origin. It covers the need quite well, but then comes the question, do you think it's rude to suggest to Steinberg that they enter into negotiations with Jam Origin to take over MIDI guitar, MIDI bass, etc., with a little layout adjustment, maybe ARA integration? It could be a fresh edition of polyphonic audio conversion. I'm sure that probably Jam Origin doesn't want to, have us take them over. I can't speak for them. But if it's working as, if it's just outputting MIDI data, you should be able to just record it directly in Cubase. And if they have kind of the whole polyphonic polyphonic audio conversion to MIDI dialed in, I think that's wonderful. But if it was kind of perfectly integrated, you should be able to just, record the MIDI data directly into Cubase. And it doesn't seem like you are able to do that. Or you wouldn't need a ARA2 integration. So I can't speak for the Steinberg developers or management decisions, but I wouldn't anticipate them that we enter into negotiations with them. And third-party companies do wonderful, great solutions that maybe we don't provide, and that's why we employ and develop standards that are used by the industry. Okay. And I see a question about someone who had purchased Cubase 10.5 a couple weeks ago, and they still haven't been given access by Nextway. And I think this is maybe the online shop, which is a third-party company that does the fulfillment for Steinberg. I try to email our export manager to see if I could get a clarification on this. But I think it's really, you have to kind of, it's like, basically a dealer, I know if you bought it from like the Steinberg online shop, it's being handled by AskNet, which I think may have turned into Nextway, but I'm not 100% sure. But, it's really, I think you'd have to kind of deal with them, but I'll see if I can get some clarification on my end. And it could obviously be, there's a lot of people that, are a lot of companies that are not fully staffed because of the stay home situation that we're in. Okay, we'll move back to some other questions. All right, so we'll see if we get some more questions. And thank you, everyone, for great questions. Okay. And I see a comment from Miller, there's no naming, and I think this is about the long file names that we were discussing earlier in the export window. There's no naming scheme, and a proper name file does appear. There just seems to be some sort of temporary files generated sequentially. They get larger as time goes by. One other area to check is to see if you've done any offline processing, like if you hit the F7, because those could generate additional audio files, but they generally go into the edits folder. So, okay, where can we download some of the most used micros? I assume that's maybe macros. So a lot of times, macros are what we want to do. They are part of keyboard shortcuts. So it's often better to create the macros. If you generated your own keyboard shortcuts, which a lot of people have if you're getting into macros, is to just, physically make the macros, because if we send you a keyboard shortcut file that has the macros in it, it can replace all of the other keyboard shortcuts that you've set up, which could be frustrating. So, sometimes like when I'm doing a tutorial, I make sure to kind of pause it so that people could pause the video and clearly see and create the macro pretty easily. So, okay. Okay, and I see about the extra files, Millard mentioned is like arg regarding the extra files. I bet it's caused by a cloud backup touching a temp file during the output generation. It could be. That could very well be. Okay, so let's see. How do I set up a template for my ID 15 drums so that the correct MIDI notes are played when using as a controller on the pads? Newbie. Okay, so depending on if you're using something like Groove Agent, for instance, a lot of times within the plugin themselves, you can come over here. So let's go to so let's say if I have a Groove Agent SE and this comes with Cubase. So I'll load up just a quick kit. So if you wanted to have your electronic drum kit and have that set up. So I'll just load up like a kit here. So a lot of times the electronic drum kits, don't, they oddly don't kind of map, to traditional standards. But if you click on this little icon here, you could use controller mapping. So here you could just kind of click on the kick and then just hit the kick drum and click on a snare, then hit the snare pad, hit your tom pads, etc. But there's also we're part of the Yamaha family, so we have a Yamaha preset, but there's also drum controller. And I think that is pretty much the, what you want to use for Roland controllers to work with the drum pads in Groove Agent. So click on the bottom here. You'll see this very subtle icon here for use hardware controller mapping. And I think that will take care of it for you. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Can you explain how MIDI information that has already been recorded can be used to create animation with audio, for example, MIDI data from Aftertouch? Well, generally, the audio, just seeing if I understand the question. So, okay, so I see explain how MIDI information that's already been recorded can be used to create animation with audio, for example, MIDI data from Aftertouch. So, the Aftertouch is only going to be really kind of employed by MIDI or MIDI instruments, but not necessarily audio. So it's not going to add any animation to audio, but maybe I could be really misunderstanding your question. So I apologize, but if you have Aftertouch, you could often change the sound of, different, as you press down on a MIDI controller and you press down harder on a single note, you could, have Aftertouch to change the particular sound, but it doesn't really work for audio parts. Okay, so question why Cubase keeps asking to allow changes to computer when starting up. I haven't really noticed that before. If you could maybe email what exact message you're having. Sometimes you may get messages if there's content that's been installed or active within a project that Cubase is expecting to see. You may notice like a message like that saying, hey, I can't find this content. And you could go into the Steinberg library manager to get rid of it. So, okay. So I see question, using an effects channel track. Sorry, my cursor just jumped a zillion questions down. So, okay, let me just see if I can find where we were. Okay, let me just see. Okay, so I'm just... Okay. Okay, so let me just, so I kind of lost my space, but I'll just go through a couple more questions. Hi, Greg, is there a way to recreate the key editor transpose on the left in the logical editor? I want to key command the semitone transposition in C major scale correction up and down. So you could, if you wanted to within the logical editor, if we had a number... Let's say I have just all sorts of random MIDI notes here, and we go to the logical editor. We could choose to transform notes, and what we want to do is take value 1, and we could set transpose to scale. So you could say, you know, I wanted these notes to transpose to D major or D melodic minor, and at this point, you know, any of the notes could automatically transpose accordingly. So if I just want to select all those notes, I could just have all those notes automatically transpose. So, you know, and then you could set up different key commands for different, you know, but you could also say you want to do C to take it and, you know, increase by 1 semitone or down a semitone. All right. So question, I've seen a tutorial for Beat Designer, but I wonder why not making the beats with MIDI editor and GM map just like in Beat Designer? How can Beat Designer make it better? Somebody thinks, you know, Beat Designer is a MIDI plugin. So if I added an instrument track, let's say just a Groove Agent SE, so, you know, many people program directly in a drum editor, and there's some advantages to that, but some people wanted more of, let me just, okay, so if I have like my pattern here, and let me just turn the solo off, we'll show you a couple things that the Beat Agent can do. So we can load this up as a MIDI insert. Or the Beat Designer, rather, sorry. And one is you could have all sorts of different presets. So if I wanted to come here, all right, so, you know, if you wanted to, you know, put in flams, so you could just kind of, you know, being able to adjust the velocity like this, but if you click a couple of different times, you could add different flams. You could have 2 independent swing feels, and then you have varying amounts of swing for each sound within the pattern. So that's pretty unique. Also, you could do stuff like, you know, I just wanted to shift left or shift right. So you could just kind of, you know, I wanted to reverse that, or now let's shift it to the left. So if you wanted an alternate feel. So those are some of the things that you could do within the Beat Designer plugin that could be a little harder in than with some of the other editors. Okay, so quick question, is there a way to link tracks so that when I'm recording, it will always arm record the linked 2 tracks? I have a command, click second track each time I record. Say if I deleted the previous track. So I think we could just do that with groups. So let's say if I add 2 audio tracks, just add 2, sorry about that. So, and even if I wanted to just, I think if we just even go and link them in a mix console. So say I have these 2 selected. So you could just do record, enable, disable. So now as soon as you link one, they'll automatically be linked. So if you go into the mix console and go to your link settings, and then you could choose which exact parameters are linked, and that could be the record enable monitor for the different tracks. All right, so it says, hello, Greg. I recently got Cubase Elements. I can't get my loops to show up. Any solution? So if you go like to the right zone and just go to media, one of the things that you'll have is if you click on the home tab, just go to your file browser. And here you could navigate anywhere on your system. You could just see, okay, I want to go to this particular, on this computer, look in this folder on that hard drive, and then you'll be able to access all the loops. Okay, just a quick comment. Greg, really appreciate all the hard work. I've learned so much since attending the Hangouts. I've only been using Cubase around 18 months so far. All right, so I'm glad it's been helpful. So we're trying to make sure everyone's getting the most out of it while they're stuck at home. Okay. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to track time spent in a specific Cubase session without any third-party software? There isn't, but I know that there's a third-party plugin that does do that. I think it's a freeware plugin that will just kind of keep a running clock. But no internal solution, but it would be nice to have. I'll mention that again. Okay, so quick question, and then we'll wrap up. Hi, Greg. Can Cubase do destructive audio editing like Wavelab? Also, thank you so much for the Hangout. So, if you have audio files, so let me just jump home here, and let's say if I wanted to just do, I drag a file in, if you hit F7, we can come over here. We can do it with the destructive offline process, but you could also just say, okay, I want to take this part of the region and I want it to, you go to processes. Okay, I want to fade out of that clip. I wanted to come here and reverse it. I wanted to come here and add more gain. I wanted to normalize. Let's pitch shift it down. And I want it, so let's say if I listen to, every horrible thing, and if I wanted to do this with plugins as well, I could say, okay, let's just run it through a chopper plugin. So now if I listen to what I had originally, you can come here and we'll just play. So, and then if I just select the clip again, I could undo any one of these changes without affecting any of the other processes. So I could just say, okay, let's just change the pitch shift. I wanted to go up instead, and I wanted to have the chopper be first. So at any time you could do all these destructive processes and undo it, multiple years later. And because the original file is always stored, so while it's technically not, destructive because the original file is intact, it kind of gets you to the same spot. And if I wanted to, multiple years later or 10 seconds later, just delete all the processes to go back where you were, then you're all set. All right, so we've gone almost 3 hours and 19 minutes. My son's been very patient, so I'm going to take him out for a walk to make sure he's doing okay and check in on him. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone has liked, the Hangout. It's great to see people from all over the world be involved with the Hangout. If you have questions that you want to submit in advance for Hangout, we'll probably be doing another one on Friday at the same time. You could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please make sure you do that. And if you learned a tip or trick today, or you like the Hangout, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. That always helps. We want to make sure that during this time that everyone stays safe and healthy, and spend some time, if you have a little more downtime, spend some time learning your Cubase. And we'll see you next time on Friday. Thank you so much.